Hello everybody, I'm Tim Cooper from National Parks at Night, and lately we've received a lot of requests from folks on how to process their Milky Way images. So what I'd like to do today is show you all some quick down and dirty tricks in Lightroom to really bring out the best in those sorts of images. But before we do that, I want you to take a moment to subscribe below so that you'll be the first to know when our new videos come out. Alright, so let's get right into it. This is an image I made down in Florida on our National Parks at Night Dry Tortugas workshop. And this is a raw image pretty much straight out of the camera. So let's take a look at how we can increase the visibility and power of the Milky Way. I always like to start with my white balance. This is as shot, as you can see right here in the white balance. But typically, I tend to make my sky a little bit more blue by lowering the white balance down closer to 3200. Every sky is going to be a little different. Each camera renders colors differently and conditions vary. So there's no particular number that you should definitely be at. Some people like their skies really blue. Some people like their skies a little bit more green. So you can take your tint slider and you can make it a slightly more green sky or a slightly more purpley blue sky. For me, I tend to like it a little bit more towards the purple rather than the cyan. Now, truth be told, this is we're just guessing here because we might want to increase our exposure a little bit, and that may change the perception of our sky color. So I've raised my exposure up +3. And I think that's looking pretty good. The one thing I don't like is an overly saturated sky, something like that. I see a lot of images like that, and for me, that's just not my cup of tea. So I may come back and actually desaturate this later. All right, now we've got our exposure, and we've increased the amount of blue to take some of the cyan out of the sky. Well, now how can we increase this Milky Way? Well, one of the great new tools, it's not too new anymore, is the dehaze slider. And you can see if I really crank it up, it really just starts to make that Milky Way pop. The problem is it has an adverse effect all over the place. So it's also affecting down in here and this break between the horizon. So instead of adding it globally, what I'll do is I'll add it via a adjustment. A local adjustment, and here I will use what's called the graduated filter. So I'll start by clicking on the graduated filter to open this box. Then I'm going to double click effect to reset everything to 0, and then I'm going to crank my dehaze up. I may not even use all of that. I probably definitely will not use all of that, but at least it'll help me see as I'm drawing this out. Now I'll start about midway over the horizon here, and just kind of pull that down just a touch. This is now the mixing zone. No dehaze happening down here. 100% of this effect happening up in here. All right. Now I'm going to double click dehaze to reset it to 0 and slowly increase it. And I think somewhere right about in there for me is what I am liking. And you can see the before and after by clicking on this little reveal on off filter. So click off and you can see, click on, that's with the adjustment. Now what that does is it increases the local contrast within the area that's being affected, which is this entire sky. The only problem is it also adds in some saturation. So again, if I go on and off, you can see how much more saturated the sky is actually getting, in addition to getting darker. So whenever I add some dehaze, I typically will also add a little bit of exposure. So I'm keeping, and actually, you know what I'm going to do here? I'm going to add a little bit of whites. That will help bring out these stars. So I'm going to bring up my whites a little bit, and then maybe a little bit of exposure. So now I'm brightening up the sky ever so slightly, but the dehaze is having the effect of adding more contrast in there. Now what I'll do is I will bring my saturation down just a little bit, so the sky isn't so brutally saturated. Now, if we look at the before and after, you're going to see the Milky Way does jump out, but we're keeping roughly the same amount of brightness. You can see these areas in here and these areas in here are about the same level of darkness, whether this is on or off. But what we've done is we've increased the brightness of all the stars and the contrast in the Milky Way itself. Now, that might be all you really need to do. But if you want, you can go in and do some other things. So for example, you could come down, and let's get out of that graduated filter. You can come down to your HSL and you can click on hue, and that will help further increase, or rather it'll help further change the color of the sky in a more subtle way. So I'm going to have mine just a little bit more purple. So I'm going to go to the right just a little bit, +3, +2. Saturation. If I feel my blue sky is a little too saturated, I can bring down that saturation. And in this case, I think it's looking pretty good. I'll just desaturate it just a touch. And now what I can do is actually increase the saturation in the purples and the magentas. And that may help bring out some of these values in here. Maybe I'll also do some of the oranges. Okay. And next we can go to luminance, and I think luminance looks pretty good there. Now, I'm going to return to the local adjustment brush, and notice when I return it says new. It means it's ready for a new brush. So I'm going to double click effect. And now what I can do is I can actually go in and increase clarity and dehaze just a little bit, and you can actually paint kind of through that Milky Way a little bit, and you can see how overdone that effect is. All right, so let's reset these to 0 and see which had the worst effect. Clarity, pretty heavy effect. Dehaze, also a pretty heavy effect. So if you're going to do this, you might want to just go in and add a point or two of each one of these, just to add some more contrast in there. And now what you could also do is go in and add a touch of saturation. Now, as I look at that, I'm still feeling that it's too dark in here compared to the rest of the sky, and that kind of looks false to me. So I might take my shadows and bring them up a little bit. And somewhere around in there. And I'm actually going to go back and take out this dehaze and the clarity, because I just think it's a little bit too much. I typically don't brush in too much on my Milky Way, although I know a lot of people that do. And I'm going to bring my saturation down. I would much rather have a underdeveloped Milky Way, so to speak, rather than an overprocessed Milky Way. Now, if we go back to where we started, we can see the before and after. So this is where I began. Added some exposure, added some dehaze, made my white balance a little bit more blue, created a graduated filter and added some dehaze in there, and very, very little on my local adjustment, and we end up here. So you can see the Milky Way is much more prominent, it stands out much more, and that's basically because of the higher contrast and the slightly higher saturation due to that dehaze filter. So folks, that's a little on how to increase the power of your Milky Ways using Lightroom. I want to thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed that. If you enjoy these videos, you can check more of them out on YouTube. You can also sign up for our blog if you go to our website, nationalparksatnight.com. And we have weekly tutorials on everything from Milky Ways to light painting to star trails, you name it, it's on there. So once again, I'm Tim Cooper from National Parks at Night, and thanks for watching.